The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched far into the distance like a metal canyon filled with strange beings from across the galaxy. Jack Morrison sat at the small human table near the back of the room and watched the alien leaders argue about humanity's future. His weathered hands rested calmly on the table, while his blue eyes took in every detail of what was happening around him. The Zephyrians looked like living crystals that caught light and threw it back in rainbow colors. Their leader, Chancellor Vextar, stood at the center podium and spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. The Luminari floated near the ceiling like ghosts made of pure light and whispered to each other in voices only they could hear. The hive creatures from Kepler clicked and buzzed in perfect harmony, while their queen sat motionless on a throne made of their own shed shells. Jack had been coming to these meetings for 20 years and had learned to read the mood of the room, like a book. Today felt different. Today felt final. The human species has been part of this council for 50 standard years, Chancellor Vextar announced to the assembled delegates. In that time, they have shown us nothing but violence and chaos. Their ships are crude metal boxes held together with welds and prayers. Their soldiers carry weapons that shoot pieces of metal instead of energy beams. They eat dead animals and grow plants in dirt instead of creating food from pure energy like civilized beings. Lisa Parker shifted in her seat next to Jack. She wore the blue uniform of Earth's military and had scars on her hands from years of fighting in places the Council had never heard of. Her jaw was tight as she listened to the Chancellor's words, but she did not speak. Jack had told her to stay quiet no matter what they said. Their science is primitive, the Chancellor continued. While we have mastered the forces of space and time, the humans still use chemical rockets to move between stars. They have no understanding of quantum mechanics or dimensional physics. Their computers are made of silicon and metal instead of living crystal or pure thought patterns. Dr. Helen Brooks sat on Jack's other side and made notes on an old paper tablet with an actual pen. She was Earth's top scientist and had spent 30 years trying to share human knowledge with the other species. Most of them had laughed at her. Research. They called human medicine crude because it used drugs made from plants instead of nanobots. They said human engineering was ugly because it was built to last instead of looking pretty. Captain Ryan Hayes stood against the wall behind them in his military dress uniform. His face showed nothing, but Jack knew the man was ready for trouble. Ryan had fought in more battles than most of these aliens had ever seen, and he understood what was coming better than anyone else in the room. Most disturbing of all, Chancellor, Vextar said as his crystal body flashed red with anger, is their attitude toward conflict. While civilized species solve problems through discussion and negotiation, the humans choose violence first. They build weapons instead of art. They train soldiers instead of poets. They speak of war as if it were something noble instead of the last resort of failed minds. The other delegates nodded and made sounds of agreement. The tree beings from Verdania creaked like old wood in a strong wind. The floating jellyfish creatures from Aquatica pulsed with blue light. Even the machine people from Mechanicus clicked their approval with metal fingers. Jack Morrison had heard it all before. For 50 years, the other species had tolerated humanity because they needed the rare metals that Earth produced. Human miners would go into dangerous asteroid fields and dig out materials that the other species wanted but were too scared to get themselves. Human traders would carry goods through pirate-infested space routes because their ships were too crude for pirates to want to steal. But tolerance was not the same as respect, and Jack had always known this day would come. Therefore, Chancellor, Vextar announced, the Galactic Council votes to remove humanity from membership effective immediately. You have 1 standard year to remove all human presence from Council space. Your ships will no longer be welcome at our ports. Your traders will no longer be allowed in our markets. Your diplomats will no longer be recognized by our governments. The hall fell silent except for the humming of the life support systems and the distant sound of ships moving through space outside. Jack Morrison stood up slowly and looked around the room at all the aliens who had just condemned his species to exile. He saw fear in some of their faces and disgust in others, but mostly he saw relief. They were finally getting rid of the embarrassing primitives who reminded them that civilization could be built on violence and determination instead of just pretty technology and polite words. "We understand," Jack said in a voice that carried clearly through the vast chamber. "Humanity will withdraw from council space within the required time. We will remove our colonies, our ships, our people, and our technology. When we are done, it will be as if we were never here." He paused and looked directly at Chancellor Vextar. For just a moment, his calm mask slipped, and something cold and dangerous flickered in his eyes. "We wish you well in your future endeavors," Jack said with a small smile that did not reach his eyes. The evacuation began within hours of the Council's decision. Across the galaxy, human colonies received the same simple message from Earth Command: "Pack everything and come home." There were no arguments or protests or desperate attempts to change the Council's mind. The humans simply started packing. Commander Alex Turner walked through the streets of New Houston for the last time. The colony had been humanity's proudest achievement in Council space, with over 2 million people living, and working on a planet that had once been nothing but rock and poison gas. Human engineers had spent 40 years turning it into a garden world with blue skies and green fields that stretched to the horizon. Now, it was time to leave. The evacuation ships hung in orbit like metal mountains waiting to carry away everything humans had built. Alex watched as crews loaded the last of the manufacturing equipment onto transport platforms. Every piece of human technology was being taken apart and moved. Every computer, every tool, every vehicle was being packed into storage containers for the journey home. "Sir, the Zephyrian delegation is here to see you," reported Lieutenant Karen Shaw as she approached with her electronic tablet in hand. "They want to discuss taking over the colony infrastructure." Alex looked at the group of crystal beings waiting near the spaceport entrance. They sparkled in the afternoon sunlight like living jewels and moved with the smooth grace that came from never having to work with their hands. Behind them stood several luminary observers who floated a few feet off the ground and glowed with soft white light. "Tell them there won't be any infrastructure left to take over," Alex said calmly. "We're taking everything that belongs to us." The Zephyrian leader stepped forward and spoke in his wind chime voice. "Surely you don't intend to dismantle the atmospheric processors, the power grid, the water purification systems? These were built for the colony, not just for humans." Alex smiled the same cold smile that Ambassador Morrison had shown in the council chamber. "We built those systems with human knowledge and human materials on a planet we terraformed with human technology. They belong to us. But the planet will die without them," protested one of the floating luminari. 2 million people live here now." 2 million humans live here, Alex corrected. "And they're leaving. What happens to the planet after that is not our concern anymore." Over the next few weeks, the other species watched in growing alarm as humans systematically dismantled everything they had built. The atmospheric processors that kept the air breathable were broken down into component parts and loaded onto ships. The fusion reactors that powered the cities were shut down and removed. Even the soil enhancement systems that made the farms productive were dug up and taken away. Dr. Susan Clark supervised the evacuation of the Xenobiology Research Station on Proxima 7. She had spent 15 years working alongside alien scientists to study the strange life forms that existed in the galaxy's outer rim. Her human team had made discoveries that changed how everyone understood biology, but none of that mattered now. "Where will you go?" asked Dr. Zelnock, a luminary scientist who had worked with Susan for most of her career. The glowing alien seemed genuinely sad to see the humans leave. "Home," Susan replied, as she sealed the last of her research samples in a container marked for transport. "We have our own facilities now. But surely you will share your research with the scientific community. The work we have done together is too important to disappear." Susan looked at her former colleague with something that might have been pity. The council just voted to expel us because our science is too primitive to be useful. Why would we share it with people who think it has no value? Dr. Zelnock's light dimmed as he realized what was happening. The humans weren't just leaving. They were taking all their knowledge with them. Decades of joint research projects, shared discoveries, and collaborative experiments were walking out the door in the heads and computers of the human scientists. Captain Danny Clark commanded the UES Liberty, one of the heavy transport ships carrying colonists away from Council space. His crew worked around the clock to process the endless stream of people and equipment flowing up from the planets below. Every day brought new refugees from failed negotiations and broken partnerships. "Captain, we're getting reports from all over the sector," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Mike Phillips. "The other species are starting to panic. Apparently they didn't realize how much of their infrastructure depended on human maintenance." Danny wasn't surprised. For 50 years, humans had done the dangerous jobs that the other species couldn't or wouldn't do. Human engineers maintained the antimatter reactors because they were the only ones willing to work with such dangerous technology. Human miners extracted rare materials from unstable asteroids because their crude ships could survive impacts that would destroy elegant alien vessels. Human technicians repaired equipment in hazardous environments because they were too stupid to be properly afraid. "Sir, incoming message from Kepler Station," reported the communications officer. "They're asking if we can delay our departure from their sector. Apparently their fusion plant is having problems, and all their human engineers have already left." "Tell them to figure it out themselves," Danny said without looking up from his status reports. "We're not their maintenance crew anymore." The evacuation continued with military precision. Human cargo ships moved through space in long convoys, carrying away the accumulated wealth of 50 years of galactic civilization. Behind them, they left empty cities, dead factories, and increasingly desperate alien governments who were just beginning to understand what they had lost. On Earth, the returning colonists were processed through massive receiving stations that had been built in secret over the past decade. Nobody asked why Earth Command had been preparing for a mass evacuation years before the Council vote. Nobody questioned where all the new ships had come from or how humanity had managed to build enough transport capacity to move millions of people in just a few months. Ambassador Morrison stood on the observation deck of the UES Constitution and watched the last human ship leave Council space. Below them, the galaxy continued its ancient dance of stars and planets and alien civilizations who thought they understood how the universe worked. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. 2 years passed in peaceful silence across the galaxy. The Galactic Council congratulated itself on finally achieving true civilization now that the violent humans were gone. Trade routes operated smoothly without crude human cargo ships cluttering up the shipping lanes. Diplomatic disputes were resolved through proper negotiation instead of threats of military action. Scientific conferences proceeded with dignity instead of being interrupted by primitive human theories about chemical medicine and kinetic weapons. Chancellor Vextar stood before the Council Assembly and delivered his annual address about the state of galactic civilization. His crystal body sparkled with satisfaction as he spoke about increased cultural exchange, improved scientific cooperation, and the general elevation of discourse now that humanity was no longer part of their society. "For the first time in 50 years, he announced to the gathered delegates, we can honestly say that our galaxy is at peace. The words had barely finished echoing through the chamber when Admiral Kethvan of the Zephyrian Defense Fleet burst through the doors with his ceremonial armor cracked and his crystal face flickering with emergency light patterns. Behind him came a stream of military officers from different species, all showing signs of extreme stress. "Chancellor," Kethvan announced in a voice that cut through the assembled crowd like a blade, "the Void Hunters have returned. The silence that followed was so complete that the life support systems seemed loud in comparison. For 300 years, the Void Hunters had been nothing more than scary stories told to young aliens to make them behave. Ancient mechanical beings from the dark space between galaxies who had once terrorized civilized worlds before mysteriously disappearing into legend. "That's impossible," whispered Elder Mossatar of Verdania, his wooden voice creaking with age and fear. "The Void Hunters were defeated centuries ago by the combined fleets of our ancestors." Admiral Kethvan activated a holographic display that showed the outer rim of the galaxy. Red dots appeared by the dozens, then by the hundreds, then by the thousands as the tactical computers updated their sensor readings. Each dot represented a Void Hunter warship emerging from the dark void between galaxies. "Initial reconnaissance reports indicate a full invasion fleet," Kethvan reported to the stunned assembly. "Preliminary estimates suggest over 10,000 vessels of unknown configuration. They are moving toward our outer colonies at approximately 60% of light speed." President Maria Rodriguez of the Emergency Defense Committee tried to maintain order as panic spread through the chamber like wildfire. The carefully maintained composure of the council races crumbled as they realized they were facing an enemy that existed only in their nightmares. "How is this possible?" demanded Hive Queen Zacnel, her insectoid voice rising to a sharp buzz of distress. "Our historical records show that the Void Hunters were completely eliminated during the Third Galactic War. Our records show they simply stopped coming," corrected Dr. Yelnara, the Luminari chief historian whose glowing form flickered with uncertainty. "There was never any record of a final battle or decisive victory. One day they were attacking our worlds and the next day they were gone. The first reports from the Outer Rim colonies began arriving within hours. The Void Hunter technology had advanced during their 3-century absence in ways that made traditional Council defenses useless. Their ships seemed to adapt to any weapon, fired at them, learning from each attack and becoming stronger. Their hull materials absorbed energy weapons and deflected kinetic projectiles. Their own weapons tore through the most advanced Council shields like they were made of paper. Colony Station 7, home to 500,000 Luminari civilians, went dark after only 20 minutes of fighting. The defense platforms around Kepler, Mining Station 3, were destroyed so quickly that they barely had time to send a distress signal. Mining operations throughout the Outer Rim reported massive black ships appearing out of nowhere and systematically destroying everything in their path. "Where are they coming from?" Chancellor Vexatar demanded as he watched red dots multiply across the tactical display. "Our deep space sensors should have detected them months ago." "They're not using conventional faster-than-light travel," Admiral Kethvan reported grimly. "Our scientists believe they have developed some form of dimensional phase shifting that allows them to move through spaces between normal reality. They can appear anywhere without warning." The Verdanian representative, Elder Oaktel, spoke in his slow, wooden voice. "In our oldest records, the Void Hunters were described as learning machines that became stronger with each battle. If they have been away for 3 centuries, they have had time to evolve. As the hours passed, the scope of the invasion became clear. This was not a raid or a probe. It was a systematic conquest of the entire galaxy. The Void Hunters moved with perfect coordination, striking multiple targets simultaneously and advancing on all fronts. Their strategy seemed designed to prevent any organized defense from forming. "Sir, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 different sectors," reported a communications officer to Admiral Kethvan. "The Outer Rim colonies are being overrun faster than we can track." The Admiral looked at the tactical display where red dots now outnumbered blue ones by a significant margin. Traditional Council military doctrine had always assumed that superior technology and proper strategy could overcome any threat. They had never faced an enemy that could adapt to their weapons in real time and learn from their tactics. "What about our reserve fleets?" asked Chancellor Vextar desperately. "Surely our combined military strength can stop them." Admiral Kethvan's Crystal face dimmed with defeat. Our preliminary engagement reports show that conventional weapons are ineffective. Every time we damage one of their ships, the others learn how to resist that type of attack. They're becoming immune to our entire arsenal. The realization hit the Council like a physical blow. For 3 centuries, they had lived in peace, assuming their technology and civilization made them safe from any threat. They had built their entire society on the belief that proper diplomacy and superior culture could solve any problem. Now they faced an enemy that didn't care about their diplomatic protocols or cultural achievements. The Void Hunters wanted only one thing: the complete destruction of all organic life in the galaxy. "How long do we have?" whispered President Rodriguez. Admiral Kethvan looked at his tactical projections and felt his crystal heart grow cold. At their current rate of advance, they will reach the core worlds within 6 months. After that, he paused, unable to finish the sentence. The assembled delegates sat in stunned silence as the reality of their situation sank in. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were about to be destroyed by an enemy they didn't understand, using weapons they couldn't defend against. For the first time in 50 years, some of them began to wonder what had happened to the humans. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 18 straight hours without a break. Delegates who normally spent their time discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges now stared at tactical displays showing the systematic destruction of their civilization. The red markers representing Void Hunter forces had spread across half the galaxy like a plague. Chancellor Vextar's crystal body had lost its usual bright sparkle and now flickered with dull, stressed patterns as he read the latest casualty reports. Kepler Colony 3 has fallen. 7 million dead. Luminary Station 12 is under direct assault. The entire Verdanian outer ring has gone silent. The numbers were so large they stopped having meaning. Entire worlds that had existed for thousands of years were being wiped clean of life in a matter of hours. The Void Hunters moved through space like a swarm of metal locusts, consuming everything in their path and leaving only empty husks behind. Admiral Kethvan stood before the assembled delegates with his ceremonial armor cracked and scorched from his last desperate battle. His fleet had engaged a small Void Hunter patrol group near Centauri Station and been completely destroyed in less than 30 minutes. He was only alive because his ship had been too damaged for the enemy to consider worth finishing off. "Our conventional weapons are worse than useless," he reported to the Council with bitter honesty. "Every time we engage them, they learn our tactics and adapt their defenses. The quantum torpedoes that worked in the first battle were completely ineffective in the second. The plasma cannons that damaged their scouts were absorbed and redirected by their dreadnoughts." President Maria Rodriguez tried to maintain some semblance of order as panic spread through the chamber. Several delegates had already fled to their home systems in hopeless attempts to organize final defenses. Others sat in stunned silence as they watched their proud civilizations crumble on the tactical displays. "What about the ancient weapons?" suggested Elder Mossatar of Verdania, his wooden voice creaking with desperation. "Surely our ancestors left us something that could stop them?" Dr. Yelnara, the Luminari historian, flickered with sad light patterns. "The historical records show that our ancestors never actually defeated the Void Hunters. They simply stopped coming. There are no weapon designs or tactical manuals because there was never a final victory." Hive Queen Zacnell's insectoid features twitched with agitation as she processed this information through her collective consciousness. Then how did the galaxy survive for 3 centuries? Why did they leave before, and why are they returning now? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud while the assembled delegates tried to find answers that didn't exist. The truth was that none of them really understood what had happened during the last Void Hunter invasion. Their historical records spoke of a mysterious end to the conflict, but provided no details about how it was achieved. "Sir," interrupted a communications officer as he approached Admiral Kethvan with a message tablet, We're receiving reports from the defense perimeter around Prime Station. The Void Hunters have begun their final assault on the capital system. The aid tactical display updated to show thousands of red dots converging on the bright blue star that marked the center of galactic civilization. Prime Station was home to over 1 billion beings from every species in the Council and represented the highest achievement of their combined cultures. "How long can the defenses hold?" asked Chancellor Vextar. Admiral Kethvon studied the tactical projections with the eye of a military professional who had spent his entire career preparing for battles he never expected to fight. The orbital defense platforms might delay them for a few hours. The planetary shields will last perhaps a day if we're very lucky. And then? Then it's over. Once Prime Station falls, they'll have destroyed the heart of our civilization. The outer colonies will surrender or be destroyed one by one until there's nothing left. The silence that followed was broken by a junior communications technician who approached the podium with obvious reluctance. "Sirs, there is one option we haven't discussed yet." President Rodriguez looked at the young officer with exhausted eyes. "What option? We've tried everything." "We could try to contact the humans." The suggestion hit the assembled delegates like a bomb. Several of them recoiled in visible disgust at the idea of asking their primitive former colleagues for help. The Zephyrians' crystal bodies flashed with indignant light patterns. The Luminari dimmed with embarrassment. Even the pragmatic Hive Queen seemed disturbed by the suggestion. "The humans were expelled from this council for good reason," Chancellor Vextar said stiffly. "Their violent nature and primitive technology have no place in civilized society." "With respect, sir," the technician continued bravely, "our civilized technology isn't stopping the Void Hunters. Maybe violent and primitive is exactly what we need right now." Elder Oaktel of Verdania creaked thoughtfully as he considered the proposal. "The humans did possess certain aggressive qualities that might be useful in a military situation. Their soldiers were trained for combat in ways that our people are not." "They've been gone for 2 years, protested Hive Queen Zachnel. "We don't even know where they went or if they're still alive. How would we contact them even if we wanted to?" Admiral Kethvon pulled up the deep space communication arrays on his tactical display. "The old emergency channels are still active. We could broadcast a general distress call and hope they receive it." The debate that followed was heated and desperate. Pride warred with survival instinct as the delegates argued about whether to swallow their arrogance and beg for help from the species they had rejected. Some insisted that asking the humans for aid would be worse than defeat. Others pointed out that defeat meant the complete extinction of their civilizations. "What makes you think they would even help us?" asked Dr. Yelnara. "We expelled them from the galaxy. They have every reason to hate us." "Humans are different," admitted President Rodriguez reluctantly. "Their sense of morality includes concepts like duty and protection that don't always make logical sense. They might help us simply because it's the right thing to do." As the tactical display showed Void Hunter forces closing in on Prime Station, the Council faced the most humbling decision in their history. They could maintain their pride and face extinction with dignity, or they could abandon everything they believed about civilization and beg their rejected former members for salvation. "Vote," Chancellor Vextar said finally. "All in favor of attempting to contact the humans?" One by one, the proud delegates of the galaxy's greatest civilizations raised their hands or tentacles or crystal formations in admission of their desperate need. The vote was unanimous. The message that went out into the dark void was simple and bitter. "This is the Galactic Council calling any human vessels. We are under attack by forces beyond our ability to resist. We request immediate assistance. Please respond." The answer was silence. For 3 weeks, the Council's desperate calls echoed through empty space without any response. The communications arrays broadcast their plea for help on every frequency known to galactic civilization. But the humans remained silent. Meanwhile, The Void Hunter advance continued with relentless efficiency, consuming world after world as they moved toward the galaxy's core. Admiral Kethvan stood in the command center of Prime Station and watched the final battle for galactic civilization unfold on his tactical displays. The orbital defense platforms that had protected the capital system for 1,000 years were being systematically destroyed by weapons that seemed to bend reality itself. Void Hunter ships phased through solid matter, their attacks coming from impossible angles as they tore apart the last organized resistance. "Sir, Defense Platform 7 has gone dark," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Shaw. "Platform 12 is reporting massive hull breaches. They're requesting permission to abandon station." "Denied," Kethvan replied grimly. "Every minute they hold out gives more civilians time to evacuate." But there was nowhere to evacuate to. The Void Hunters had sealed off all the escape routes and were systematically hunting down refugee ships as they fled the system. Their technology had evolved far beyond anything the Council races could comprehend, turning their most advanced warships into helpless targets. "Admiral," called the communications officer from his station across the command center, "I'm detecting something strange on the long-range sensors. There's a massive gravity distortion forming at the edge of the system." Kethvan looked at the sensor readings with confusion. The distortion was unlike anything in their databases, too large to be a natural phenomenon, but following patterns that didn't match any known technology. It seemed to be tearing a hole in space itself, creating a tunnel between dimensions. What could cause a distortion that size? He asked his science officer. "Unknown, sir. The energy readings are off our charts. Whatever's coming through is bigger than anything we've ever seen." The first human ship emerged from the dimensional rift like a predator stepping out of the shadows. It was massive beyond anything the Council races had ever built, sleek and deadly in ways that made their most advanced vessels look like primitive toys. The hull was made of some dark material that seemed to absorb light itself, and weapon systems covered every surface like the scales of a dragon. Captain Nathan Pierce stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution and studied the battle raging around. Prime Station through sensors that could track individual atoms across stellar distances. His ship was one of the new breed that humanity had built during their exile. Vessels designed not for exploration or trade, but for war against enemies that conventional weapons couldn't touch. "Analysis complete, Captain," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Karen Shaw. "The Void Hunters have deployed approximately 4,000 vessels in standard assault formation. Their technology shows significant advancement from previous encounters, but remains within acceptable parameters for engagement." Nathan nodded as more human ships emerged from the dimensional rift behind them. The fleet that materialized in the Prime system was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Each vessel was a masterpiece of destructive engineering, built with knowledge gained from centuries of fighting in the dark spaces where civilized races feared to go. "Signal Admiral Clark on the Vengeance," Nathan ordered. "Tell him we're ready to begin liberation protocol." Admiral Danny Clark commanded the human fleet from the UES Vengeance, a ship so large it had its own gravity field. He had spent the last 2 years preparing for this moment, knowing that eventually the Void Hunters would return and the Council would need to learn the price of their arrogance. "All ships, this is Admiral Clark," he announced over the fleet communication system. "You know what the Void Hunters have done to the people of this galaxy. You know what they'll do to Earth if we let them finish here. Show them what humanity learned while we were away." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The human ships moved through space with impossible grace, their weapon systems firing exotic energies that the Void Hunters had never encountered. Dimensional phase cannons tore through adaptive armor by attacking from parallel realities. Quantum torpedo swarms overwhelmed defensive systems by existing in multiple states simultaneously. Captain Pierce watched his tactical display as Void Hunter dreadnoughts that had seemed invincible moments before exploded into clouds of metallic debris. The enemy's adaptive technology was useless against weapons that operated on principles they had never been programmed to understand. "Target the command ship," Pierce ordered his weapons officer. "Let's see how they adapt to having their central intelligence destroyed." The massive Void Hunter flagship was protected by shields that had deflected every weapon the Council races could bring to bear. It phased through normal space like a ghost, untouchable by conventional physics. But the Retribution's main cannon fired a beam of crystallized space-time that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. The Void Hunter command ship simply ceased to exist. Without their central coordination, the remaining Void Hunter vessels began to falter. Their perfect formation broke apart as individual ships tried to adapt to threats they couldn't understand. The human fleet pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency, using weapons and tactics developed during centuries of warfare in the spaces between galaxies. "Sir, the enemy fleet is breaking off," reported Lieutenant Shaw. "They're attempting to retreat to dark space." "Negative," Admiral Clark's voice came over the communication system. "No survivors. We can't let them escape to warn the others." The human ships pursued the fleeing Void Hunters with predatory intensity. Gravity well generators prevented any escape to faster-than-light travel, while reality anchors locked the enemy vessels in normal space. One by one, the ancient mechanical horrors that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia were hunted down and destroyed. Admiral Kethvon watched from Prime Station's command center as the impossible happened before his eyes. The Void Hunter invasion fleet that had seemed unstoppable was being systematically annihilated by ships that fought like nothing he had ever seen. The humans moved through battle like they had been born for it, using weapons that turned physics itself into an ally. "How is this possible?" he whispered to himself as the last Void Hunter vessel exploded in silent fire. When the battle was over, space around Prime Station was filled with metallic debris and the strange energy signatures of exotic weapons. The human fleet hung motionless in the aftermath, their dark ships like shadows against the stars. A single communication came from the flagship. "Galactic Council, this is Admiral Clark of the Human Defense Fleet. Your space is secure. We'll be in touch." Then the ships vanished back into their dimensional rift, leaving only silence and the slowly cooling wreckage of an enemy that had once seemed invincible. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council looked different now. The delegates who had once carried themselves with the pride of superior beings now sat in their chairs like prisoners awaiting judgment. 3 months had passed since the human fleet had destroyed the Void Hunter invasion in 17 minutes, and the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. Chancellor Vextar stood at the central podium, but his crystal body no longer sparkled with authority. The confident leader who had expelled humanity from the Council was gone, replaced by a being who had seen his entire understanding of the universe shattered in a single battle. Around him, the other delegates waited in uncomfortable silence for the humans to arrive. Ambassador Jack Morrison entered the chamber exactly on time, just as he had done for 20 years before the expulsion. He looked older now, with more lines around his eyes and gray in his hair, but there was something else different about him. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Behind him walked Dr. Helen Brooks, still carrying her old paper notebook, but now accompanied by assistants who wheeled in cases of equipment that hummed with energies the Council races couldn't identify. Captain Ryan Hayes followed in a uniform that looked similar to his old one, but was made from materials that seemed to absorb light and shadow. The humans took their seats at the small table near the back of the chamber, just as they had done for decades. But this time, nobody in the room made the mistake of thinking that meant they were unimportant. "We are grateful," Chancellor Vexitar began carefully, his wind chime voice lacking its former arrogance. "Without your intervention, our civilization would have been completely destroyed. The debt we owe to humanity cannot be calculated." Jack Morrison looked up from the papers he was reading and studied the Chancellor with eyes that had seen things the alien leader couldn't imagine. "Debt?" he said quietly. "You think this is about debt?" The silence that followed was so complete that the air recycling system seemed loud in comparison. Every delegate in the chamber leaned forward slightly, afraid to miss a single word of what the human ambassador might say next. "For 300 years, Jack continued in the same calm voice, humanity has been fighting the void hunters in the dark spaces between galaxies. Every time they tried to invade this galaxy, we were there to stop them. Every probe they sent, every scouting mission they launched, every reconnaissance fleet they deployed, we hunted them down and destroyed them before they could report back." Dr. Brooks opened her notebook and activated a holographic display that showed star charts the Council had never seen before. The images revealed a vast network of human bases and shipyards scattered through the empty void between galaxies, connected by supply lines and patrol routes that stretched across impossible distances. "While you built your civilizations in the safety of the galactic core," she explained, "human soldiers were dying in battles you never knew were being fought. We lost entire fleets protecting worlds that didn't even know we existed. We sacrificed generations of our best people to keep monsters away from your children." The implications hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Their entire understanding of galactic history was wrong. The peace they had enjoyed for centuries wasn't because their ancestors had been strong or wise or diplomatically skilled. It was because humans had been standing guard in the darkness, fighting horrors that would have destroyed their civilizations without a second thought. "But why?" whispered Elder Mostar of Verdania, his wooden voice creaking with confusion. "Why would you protect people who saw you as primitive and inferior?" Captain Hayes answered with the blunt honesty of a soldier who had seen too much death to waste time on pretty words. "Because someone had to. Because if we didn't do it, millions of innocent people would die, because protecting others is what humans do, even when those others treat us like garbage." Hive Queen Zachnell's insectoid features twitched as she processed this information through her collective consciousness. "The historical records show that your species was involved in numerous conflicts before joining the Council. We assumed you were naturally violent and aggressive." "We are," Jack Morrison admitted without shame. "Humans are very good at violence. We've had thousands of years of practice fighting each other and everything else that wanted to kill us. But being good at violence doesn't mean we enjoy it. It means we're willing to do the terrible things that need to be done so that others don't have to." He stood up slowly and walked to the center of the chamber, looking around at all the aliens, who had once judged his species as unfit for civilized society. "You expelled us because you thought we were too primitive to understand your advanced culture. Because our ships were ugly and our weapons were crude and our soldiers were too willing to fight." The tactical display updated to show images of the human fleet that had destroyed the Void Hunter invasion. The sleek, deadly vessels bore no resemblance to the crude metal boxes the Council remembered. These were ships built by a civilization that had spent centuries perfecting the art of war against impossible odds. "What you never understood," Jack continued, "is that we kept our technology simple, and our methods crude because we were fighting enemies you couldn't imagine. Elegant solutions don't work against beings that can adapt to any energy weapon. Beautiful designs are useless against creatures that exist in multiple dimensions. Sometimes the only way to stop a monster is with bigger monsters." President Rodriguez tried to maintain some semblance of diplomatic protocol as the full scope of humanity's deception became clear. "What do you want from us now? Surely there must be some way we can repay you for your protection." Jack Morrison smiled, and this time it wasn't cold or threatening, just tired. "We don't want anything from you. We've learned to be self-sufficient during our exile. We have our own worlds now, our own trade networks, our own alliances with species you've never met. We don't need the Council for anything." He paused and looked directly at Chancellor Vextar. "But the galaxy still needs us. The Void Hunters. We just destroyed were only a scouting force. The real invasion is still coming, probably within the next decade. When it arrives, it will make what you just saw look like a minor skirmish." The revelation sent waves of terror through the assembled delegates. If the fleet that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization was just a scouting force, what would the real invasion look like? "So here's how things are going to work from now on," Jack announced with quiet authority. "Humanity will continue to protect this galaxy because that's what we do. We'll fight the monsters in the dark so you can sleep safely in your beds. We'll sacrifice our people and our ships and our lives to keep your civilizations alive." He walked back to the human table and gathered his papers with calm efficiency. "In return, you'll remember that your continued existence depends on our goodwill. You'll remember that every day you spend in peace is a gift paid for with human blood. And you'll remember that if you ever again decide we're too primitive or too violent or too distasteful for your company." Jack Morrison looked around the chamber one more time, meeting the eyes of every delegate who had voted to expel his species. "We'll leave. For good this time. And then you can face the darkness alone." The silence that followed his departure was deafening. The proud civilizations that had once dismissed humanity as inferior now understood the terrible truth. They owed their very existence to the species they had scorned, and their future survival depended on never forgetting that debt. Again,